good mood for Wait, what? Sports. You are depressing, but it was worth it because before we came on to record, we got him so good that we made him get up and leave the studio. I will post that for you guys later.
I found some really good dad jokes online. I was also giving him some of our classic dad jokes from my family. And he was just like, yep, nope, can't do it.
He was just like, can we get started now? Can we make this, please make it stop.
Although I think inside he's secretly like, God, I can't wait until I can officially tell dad jokes. Which, by the way, I got to tell you, dad jokes aren't just for dads. I've actually seen categories of like mom jokes.
Which are probably worse than dad jokes.
Yeah, it's
as
just,
far as like, really. You still laugh, but you're just like, there's no way. He's getting the bill out.
He almost forgot. So anyways, today's show, we're doing an honor to a gentleman who has recently been in the news. And this is how Gina found out about him. Because I found the news story and I was like, what? I didn't realize this gentleman had gone to the Olympics. I knew him as a football player. And actually, if you follow football, you would know him as one of the names that has an award named after him.
Which I didn't know that.
But in the news this last week, Jim Thorpe, who may be the most underrated,
unsung
greatest
hero
athlete of all time.
Listen.
In multiple sports.
Sports that are completely unrelated in a lot of ways, and you're just like, how? How can one human do this?
Did you know that there was an athlete in history, Eli, who played professional baseball, professional football, professional basketball, and went to the Olympics for track?
So basically he was a renaissance man of sports, correct?
Yes. Absolutely.
And he also played lacrosse in school.
Won a ballroom dancing championship, almost played freaking hockey.
Yeah, almost played
professionally.
Yeah.
I stick with my statement that we talked about. He's an alien. He's not human. MIB is real. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Prove to me otherwise, because I've never seen a person
Torchwood
like this. Facts. If you don't know what Torchwood is,
if you don't know what Torchwood is, Google it. It's one of the better sci-fi shows from BBC.
Yes. Anyway,
with really cute actors. Anyways.
So my friend who listens to the show was like, "Is that all Amy thinks about?"
No, but I will point it out at every opportunity.
Right. I mean, you got to appeal to all demographics. Okay, all demographics.
So, anyways, the gentleman we're talking about is Jim Thorpe. So, Jim Thorpe, 2 weeks ago, was finally reinstated as the sole winner for the 1912 Olympic gold medals in the... I have to look here for the...
Oh, I know this one. The pentathlon and the decathlon.
That's what it was. I couldn't remember which events it was. But in the first...
Yes.
Pentathlon and decathlon.
And then furthermore, like, we're going to get into all this, but, like, the facts are just so astounding. It was his first time ever competing in those sports and had the nerve to go both. And blew his competition completely out the water. Like, that's why I said he's an alien. I'm going to keep repeating this because I need you to understand.
And then he was robbed of the gold medal.
He was, yeah.
And
even his competitors were like, what?
110 years.
That poor man.
To get his medal back.
That poor man.
110 years.
And the why, like I said, we'll get to it, but the why he lost it is just like such BS to me. Like, I get it, but at the same time, like, as I was reading more, I was like, you didn't even follow your own rules when you took his medals.
The changing of the rules throughout the decades through the Olympics is also on display in this story.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Gina, where did you want to start with Jim? Do you want to just start with the story and how we discovered all the things that he did just because we were like, oh my God, this story is amazing. And then we were like, let's look into actually this athlete. Because like I said, I knew him as a football player. I didn't realize he had gone to the Olympics.
Yeah.
You know, we started looking into things and we were like, what the heck? This man is just superhuman.
Like, as we kept reading, we were just like, wait, he did that and that and that, and then he knew this person, they played against this person, they played for this person. Like, that is all the lives he intersected with that, like, we know today.
Well, and then, you know, as we talk about some of these historical figures, the other thing is that, you know, we wind up discovering things about history that we never knew.
Mm-hmm.
Or that we may have known a little bit about, but we didn't really know.
Exactly.
So we'll get into that as well, as far as, you know, how he wound up becoming an athlete that could do all these things.
Mm-hmm.
So, like I said, a couple weeks ago, his gold medals were reinstated. It was all over the news.
Yeah.
On all the news stations, CNN, BBC, you know, ABC, CBS, all of that. So, the 1912 Olympics were held in Stockholm.
Mm-hmm.
And again, he was in the pentathlon and the decathlon, which, if you don't know, these are competitions where they have in the pentathlon 5 different events that you have to score as many points in.
Right.
In all of these events. And the decathlon is 10 events. And your combined score between all of the events is what gets you a medal. It's kind of like being the Olympic gymnastics all-around champion.
Yeah. That's a very good comparison.
You have to have a certain number of points for each of these things. I believe in the pentathlon, he actually came in first place in 4 out of the 5.
I think it was something like that.
4 out of 5 events, he came in the top.
Like, that's just crazy to me. Like, how I can get a couple, but like, pretty much the whole thing, you completely just swept the competition.
Right. And so he won this gold medal,
mm-hmm.
and he came back home to a ticker tape parade.
And then you realize, like, they do that for, like, World Series champions and, like, presidents and stuff like that.
The guys who went to the moon.
Right.
They do it for the Olympic champions a lot of times, especially if, you know, any of them happen to be from New York.
True.
But, yes, back in the day, it literally was just for, like, the biggest of the big. The Olympic champions and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
One thing to know about Jim Thorpe that was really actually quite important to know and to understand why this was such a big deal.
Right.
Is that Jim was actually Native American.
Mm-hmm. I figure
both of his parents were half Native, half white.
Yeah.
So, and they were from different tribes, but...
he's from the Sac and Fox tribe.
Right, so his father was Sac and Fox, his mom was a different tribe, but the way Native traditions work...
Potawatomi, I think she was.
Yeah. The way that Native traditions work is that, like, the children follow the father's tribe, for the most part.
Okay.
So... And that's the land that they grew up on, was the Sac and Fox reservation.
Got it.
Okay. So, as we talked about before, when we were talking about Larry Doby and Jackie Robinson and all these other great athletes, Native Americans seem to not have as much of an issue breaking some of those color barriers.
Right.
As others, but it still put him in a unique position.
Absolutely.
And I'll talk about that when we get into the history of him and where he came from and where he went to school and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
A year after he won the medals, they were taken away from him.
Can you imagine being on this, like, cloud 9? Like, you've done the near impossible. And then, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, almost on, like, trumped up charges for what they were.
Right. So
you get all of that taken away, like, it doesn't count.
An investigative reporter.
You saw my eye roll.
An investigative reporter was doing a story on Jim and discovered that he had been paid to play baseball in 1910 for a minor league team. By Olympic rules at the time, he technically was not supposed to have gotten paid for any athletics in order to play in the Olympics. You had to be a complete amateur.
And I always, when you told me that, I was just like, that's crazy that, like, you can be in a completely unrelated sport. And if you got paid $1 for that sport, you were considered a professional at that point. And I never knew that it was strictly amateurs at one point in the Olympics either. I had no idea.
I mean, honestly, it was strictly amateur up until 1996.
Wow.
The Dream Team in 1996
was
in
this
Atlanta
break
was
away
the
from that.
very first year they allowed professional players to play. And that they allowed athletes. But you sitting over there thumbs upping me, Eli? Like I didn't live through it. Like I
literally.
wasn't actually in high school in the 1996 year.
I was actually giving you kudos for the fact for the Dream Team because I knew that too. And, Dr. Robinson's please.
Oh, God. Mute your mic. Like
Again, like I wasn't in high school and didn't actually go and get pictures of the torch when it was running through Northeast Ohio.
Right. Like, she was there live and in person. In real life. IRL.
But I was an Olympics junkie my entire life.
Really?
My mom loved particular sports.
Okay.
I will get teased by your friend again for this, but my mom absolutely loved men's gymnastics, men's swimming, men's diving.
Makes sense.
Okay. And then figure skating. So,
Still
she
fun
just
stuff.
overall liked figure skating, just in general.
Okay.
But yes. So, the Olympics in 96 was the first time officially you could get paid for your athletics and still compete.
So I wonder, did that even include endorsements? Like you couldn't be making anything
So
prior to?
There were rules about like the amount of endorsements you could have in the year and a half leading up to a competition and things like that.
Okay.
Because basically before your very first Olympic, you couldn't make any money off of your athleticism.
Got it. So, like, if you were, like, a truck driver, no big deal. But if you were, like, a golfer that competed in tournaments and got paid, then no go.
Well, golf wasn't even an Olympic event until...
Well, I mean, like, would that be considered, like, a sport that you would get?
In my lifetime, you couldn't get paid for the sport that you were competing in.
Got it.
And if you were a multi-sport athlete, like, say, Shaun White, who does skateboarding and snowboarding, so that you would be in both Olympics, or that you did a couple of different things, you couldn't get paid for either of those.
Okay. Got it.
That pay didn't necessarily include, like I said, your endorsements. But again, you were limited. You weren't allowed to sign endorsement deals until after you had been at your first Olympic.
Okay.
Also, the age for competing back then in most sports was like a year to 2 years older than it is now. And they're looking at raising the ages again. I mean, because, like, you've got 12-year-olds competing in figure skating. I was about to say,
there's, like, what was it, like a 13-year-old from Japan last year or something like that? Like, exploitation people. They're still children. Well, I get it, but at the same time, it's like,
Well, the thing is that while younger bodies overall are able to do certain things better,
right,
aka flexibility, they don't always have the strength to live up to that potential,
right,
and they don't always have the mental capacity.
That's where I would go with it. That makes more sense.
And that's actually the thing that they're worried about now, which is why they're looking at raising the ages again.
Yeah.
Previously, it had just been physically. Then they proved that younger and younger kids could physically hold up to it. But, now they're looking at the mental standpoint. But regardless, I'm surprised he hasn't done.
He's not paying attention. Shh. He's in a whole nother world. See, now he's listening. Dadgummit.
But anyways, so officially, people weren't getting paid. The reason everything changed in 96 was because for about 20 years, you could practically prove that USSR, China, East Germany, any of the Eastern Bloc countries, you could feasibly argue that their athletes were getting paid to be athletes. Officially, they weren't. They were getting stipends from the government.
Right.
They were getting government assistance, and their families were getting government assistance, quote unquote. But when it came down to it, those kids were paid to train.
Right, and that's all they did. It wasn't like they had a 9-to-5 job and then they trained in the evening.
So most of the time, those kids were taken from their families.
Yeah.
The families were given money every year for these kids to be at these training facilities. So in the U.S., if you want to be an Olympic athlete, you pay a coach. You pay for facility use. You pay for all these things. Plus, you still have to go to school. Plus, you have to do all this other stuff. And your family's trying to figure out how to afford it.
Exactly.
There, they were provided their uniforms. They were provided their training. They were provided their schooling.
Wow.
They trained for 12 hours a day.
So they were paying them in a different way.
They were paying them in a different way. They were given all the best food. When the rest of China was starving, the Chinese athletes were getting the best food.
I'm sure they were.
When the rest of Russia was starving, the Russian athletes were getting the best food. They were also getting other things, but that's a whole different story and a whole different series to be done. A whole different show as to, performance enhancing drugs, the Olympics, and the Iron Curtain. But
I'm writing that down as a show idea for the future.
There's actually a really good documentary recently about the female athletes in East Germany and what happened to them after the 1970s scandals with vitamins, quote unquote, that they were given. Anyways, so that's how everything changed. So it went from being no pay for any athletic competition that you may have done.
Right.
To you can't get paid for your sport or sports before you come to the Olympics. To professionals can play.
Right.
I mean, in its truest form, it was supposed to only be an amateur competition. So,
because when I was reading, it was interesting. The guy who came up with that whole idea was like, if you're a really good athlete, you shouldn't need to practice. Like, it should be a natural born talent, which is where some of that amateurism belief came from. They were like, it's an unfair advantage if you go practice. I was like, I mean, yeah, but...
yeah, I mean, you got to think about, that was the 1800s as well.
That's true. They
didn't really,
my modern sensibilities, But anyway.
So, Jim Thorpe fought to get his medals back.
Yeah.
And he was continuously denied. This was even as, the Swiss King was like, but he's the greatest athlete anybody's ever seen.
Right.
Like, when he got his medal, he was presented a special prize. So back then, the different events were sponsored sometimes by different members of royalty across Europe. And so the Swiss King had sponsored, I believe, the decathlon, and I believe
was it Russia? Yeah.
The Tsar had sponsored the pentathlon. And so he got special prizes and met both of those men.
Right.
And the Swiss King was like, you, sir, are the greatest athlete I've ever seen. Okay.
This says a lot. Like, when the king of a whole country is like, I've never seen another person ever as good as you. And the story goes that he was like, thanks, king, but
at the same time, when you read all these things about how shy he was,
he was
and
very
how reserved he was.
To be as good of an athlete as he was, for him to just be like, I don't like the spotlight, I don't want people to pay attention to me. Like, stop being so great. People stop paying attention to you.
I mean, we don't know what that life is like because most of our athletes make most of their money off of endorsements and by being out there.
Being the face of something.
Right. So, in the mid-'80s, he was reinstated as the gold medal winner. Meaning the people who had been bumped up from silver to gold when they took away his gold medal, they are now sharing a gold medal with him, and his family was given reproductions of the gold medal from 1912. This was 20 years after he passed away.
Man.
Yeah.
And that's as far as I got was, we'll give you some of the credit back. I mean, technically, I guess you did win.
Right. So, in the last couple of years, there was an organization called Bright Path.
Yeah.
Which is actually the translation of Thorpe's Native American name, which his mom gave him. I found out he was actually twin.
Yes.
He was a twin. And his mom, in her Native community, their tradition was to give the Native name at the moment of birth after something that happened or that you could see or feel or do at the moment of birth.
Mm-hmm.
And so she apparently was looking out the window and saw the sun rise and named him Bright Path. Unfortunately, his twin's Native name was lost to history. So we don't know what his twin, but his twin Charlie also would have gotten
something
a
similar.
Native name. So Bright Path has been working on petitions and talks with the IOC to get this medal reinstated. And for those you don't know, IOC is the Olympic Committee, the International Olympic Committee.
Mm-hmm.
So as part of this, they had to go to, I believe, Norway was the runner-up in one of the events, and Switzerland was the runner-up in one of the other events. They had to go to those two Olympic committees as well.
It's a lot of,
and talk to the winners' families, so those silver medalists' families, and say, hey, we really want to get Jim his gold medal standing back. And they had always maintained that their ancestor had maintained that Jim was the best athlete that day.
Right.
And that they were not gold medalists. They never accepted the medals. They went and checked with their country's Olympic committees. They said, no, they never actually accepted their gold medals. We're still holding them here.
Wow. That's crazy.
Because they didn't feel like they were gold medal winners. They believed they were silver medalists.
And I think that has a lot to do with, how sports is such a unifying thing. People from all different walks of life that you would never see in the same room or at the same place at the same time. When sports comes into it, and especially as an athlete, you can recognize how much better somebody else is than you and not be upset about it. And be like, that just pushes you to want to do better. So for both of those silver medalists, to both of them say, you know what, that's not fair. I wasn't better than him. He's always been better than me. And I maintain that to the day I die.
And they all feel like he was wrongfully stripped of his medal.
Yeah.
Jim always maintained that he was just a poor... Yeah, I'm gonna use his words. This is his quote.
Mm-hmm.
I was just a poor Indian kid who went to a poor Indian school who was never told what the rules were.
Mm-hmm.
So when he was recruited for the Olympic Committee, he didn't know he needed to disclose the fact that he had been paid like $10 to play 3 games of minor league baseball.
$10.
Now remember, $10 in 1912.
I mean, I know. It's just the idea.
Is like $1,000+ today. Okay.
Right.
But he didn't realize he needed to do that, and that was his argument, and he kept getting turned down and everything else. But those families were like, not everybody knows the rules. They were like, we didn't even really know the rules.
Right.
And
it's like, I think when you brought that up to me, I said, it's not like they probably gave you a rule book back then and was like, read through this so you can understand exactly what all is expected of you. You just go in knowing I qualified to compete.
I was recruited.
Exactly. So if you don't tell me up front.
If you don't ask me the questions.
How am I going to give you the answers?
Right.
Exactly.
So, that was kind of where we started off with everything with Jim Thorpe. He was this man who I mean, just think about how much that had to change you, right?
Yeah.
To know that you won this and then have it stripped away on something that was such a small technicality.
Exactly.
And that most people, in fact, even the silver medal winners, said they believed that the investigative reporter was doing his investigation because of race.
I think I missed that. Okay, but that makes sense. And we'll talk a little bit about how racism did play a part in his
life, his whole life. honestly.
I mean, at the end of the day, he is brown skinned. He's a minority. So people use that to their advantage. It is what it is.
Well, and he was born shortly after the end of the Indian Wars.
Yeah, yeah.
So, you know, when you are born less than 20 years after Custer's final battle.
That's insane.
Custer's last stand. The Battle of Little Bighorn.
And when you think about all that he accomplished, you're just like, that makes it even more incredible. Because when you think about all that he accomplished and the way that Native Americans were looked at, and he was like to a certain degree, so accepted and looked at in such high regard by so many people from different countries, from America, like that's even more mind-blowing than just his accomplishments.
Right. And it goes back to this whole idea of like, you know, if you're good enough in a thing, then, especially in a sport for some reason.
Something about sports, man.
People will look the other way for a small amount. Like, as we talked about with Joe Louis, like, you know, people will kind of, you know, get behind you when they normally wouldn't if you're good enough.
Exactly. Give them a reason to.
Representing the country.
Facts.
So I want to say, the librarian, me, of course, there's a children's book.
Naturally.
About Jim Thorpe. It's actually probably about a 6th or 7th grade reading level. So
which is like really the one we had last time.
Children's book. It's slightly more involved. Probably, maybe even high school. But I will say, I will plug it. You should read it. It's really, really good. But I'm already like 13 chapters in, 75 pages in, and we're still talking about the history of Jim, his soon-to-be coach, and the school that he wound up attending. So,
and to think that like you're just barely scratching
football. So it's
you're
like,
just scratching the surface, and it goes so much deeper than that. And you're still.
I mean, there are 230 pages.
You got a little hump to go. A little bit of that mountain to climb. You're like just over base.
So but it's a good research book for us because it does touch on like I said, the history of football.
Right.
The history of you know, college play, how it became a professional sport, and all of that. But it did, you know, start off again with the history of Jim, and then the history of his very famous coach.
Go ahead and drop that name. Go ahead and name drop, because we'll be doing that throughout the episode.
Right. So I didn't even realize that this necessarily was a real person.
I can see why you would say. I can see why you would say that.
I just thought that they had just, you know, named these like little league football things. Like, you know, I don't know where they got the name for it. I was just like, okay, but this gentleman who was one of the very first coaches in he actually was the first coach of a football team.
I did not know that.
Of a college team at that. He was a player that started coaching. He drew up actually the very first sneak play. Anyways.
What?
Yes.
He gets his own show.
He was the first coach to actually do the X's and O's. And
what?
Play number 36 was the very first sneak play. Anyway.
Yeah, he gets his own show. But anyway, continue.
He played for Harvard, I believe. Yeah, Harvard. Mr. Pop Warner. Again, I had no idea that he was a real person.
Right.
I just knew Pop Warner football.
Exactly. Like, I would have you've never heard of him as a person. All you ever hear is Pop Warner football. So you just assume, like, I always thought it was short for something. Like, maybe pop meant, like, popular. I don't know.
Yeah, I was like, I had no clue. I was like, where are they getting this name from? And I honestly didn't realize that it was Pop Warner football was like a national thing.
Right.
Like, growing up, because you only hear about it where you're living.
Where you live at, right.
Until you grow up and you move away and you hear about it someplace else. So I had no clue.
Why would you know?
But yeah, so Pop Warner was the coach for the school that Jim Thorpe eventually went to. And that's like where he made his name, actually, was in this school. And
it gets so good in this little section because of just like how he ended up playing sports.
So we probably should start with Jim's young life.
Yes. I'm going to let you take over.
So, as we stated, Jim was born on the Sac and Fox Reservation. And at the time, the Indian Bureau, United States Indian Affairs Bureau, they were starting to set up schools for the natives on reservations. In fact, the school he eventually went to was the very, very, very first Indian boarding school. And the man who founded it had been a soldier in the Civil War and in the Indian Wars. And he had fought for Custer and retired about a year before Custer's last stand.
Right. It was earned.
So he believed that the only way to get the native students integrated into U.S. culture was to take them away from the influence of their family. Okay, and this is something where there are still tragedies going on right now. In fact, last week the Pope was in Canada to apologize to Native families for the role of the church in their Native boarding schools. Because in the last 2 years, they have found 284 unmarked graves at one of the schools.
So sad.
And each one of these Native American boarding schools that the U.S. had, as they were closing them in the mid-'60s. Yes, you got that right. The 1960s and 70s, they were closing. I mean, there were still some around in the 80s.
I mean,
that weren't reservation schools. They now have schools on the reservation, just like every city has a
right,
school
like a normal school,
right?
Not meant to indoctrinate you into another culture altogether,
right? But they were taking away their language. Like, you weren't allowed to speak your native language on campus. They would.
It's very similar to slavery.
For it. Yes.
Yeah, in that regard.
You would get punished for speaking your native language. You would get punished for. I mean, the moment you showed up, they shaved your head. They took away all of your comfortable clothing, and they gave you the itchy wool pants, the itchy wool stockings if you were a girl, the high-necked Victorian dresses, all of that.
And they forced you to change your name.
And honestly, there was a movie called The Education of Little Tree that was came out in the early 2000s, late 90s. That was fairly good depiction of what happened at these schools. But yes, like your very first day of classes, your very first class you go into, there are a bunch of English names written on the board. These squiggly lines mean nothing to you, right?
I don't read any of this.
And they tell you to pick a name off the board, and that becomes your name for the rest of your life.
Can't even imagine. And like,
and they didn't differentiate between like boys' names and girls' names, like.
You whatever name we just say you are. That's
whatever
what you
name
now.
you picked off the board.
Not knowing what it even says.
Right.
Like, I'm just want those set of like T's
squiggly
and
lines.
crosses and whatever that is.
I have no idea what that is.
Man.
So, now, because Jim's parents were both half white, they had actually grown up with a mixture.
Right.
So Jim's mom, her father was actually a French trader. So he was a fur trader.
Okay.
And she grew up, in white man's culture.
Right.
As well as in her mother's culture. And then Jim's dad, his father was a white man. And they grew up, farming and everything. But they had already given their kids English names.
Yeah, because he was born like Jacob something or whatever.
Yeah, so they had actually already given them English names and native names.
Got it.
So
that was very progressive if you think about it, like being able to be aware of both sides of who you are.
Right. So he, he started off by going to a local Indian boarding school. Mm-hmm. And by local, I mean it was like, 20 miles away, 36 miles away, rather than half a country away.
Right. The whole other side of the world, essentially. Okay.
He got dropped off at the school with his twin brother. Charlie was a very good student. Jim, not so much.
Oh, there's always that dichotomy sometimes, like with siblings. Like you have the Lisas and the Barts of the world, so he was the Bart.
Yeah, I mean, he was more interested in physical things.
Yeah.
When they had been at home learning as young kids, they created games that they would play, and he was outdoors all day long.
Right.
And he did not like being inside.
That's what he was meant to be.
He did not want to be inside. So, I believe on 3 different occasions, he ran away from school.
Oh, gosh. He was just like, this is not for me, and I don't want to be here.
Yeah, the first one before Charlie passed, and then the second one, unfortunately, one of the things with these schools is that you got a lot of kids, very close quarters.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily getting fed the best of food, and they're not necessarily being treated right, and they're homesick and everything else. Disease can pass through really quickly. Mm-hmm. And so they had a year where they had a typhoid outbreak, followed by a pneumonia outbreak, followed by something else. And unfortunately, Charlie passed of pneumonia. The family had made it to his bedside before he passed.
At least they got to say goodbye.
The family all went home together to bury Charlie. Jim would say after that, part of the reason why he was so good was because all of Charlie's talents came to him after Charlie passed. In their spirit connection.
Aww. I love that. I love that.
But he was shortly thereafter sent back to school. And then he ran away. And
that was time number 3, right?
That was the second time.
Oh.
He came home. And each time that he ran away, the first 2 times, his father promptly turned around and took him back. The third time, literally, the moment his dad dropped him off, he started home. He took a shortcut.
And beat his dad home.
Beat his dad home.
That means you've ran away so much you've learned alternate paths to run away. That says a lot.
And he beat his dad home. And at that point, his dad was like, well, if you're not going to go, you're not going to go, but you can't stay here.
Oh, wow.
So for several years, he lived in the woods and as a trapper and caught his own food and sold pelts.
Good thing he was good outdoors. I feel like everything for him was just lining up.
Yes.
The way it was meant to be. Like, if he had never gotten taken away from home, if these schools never existed, like, he would have been totally fine.
Yeah. So, he eventually got to a point where he was like, what am I doing?
Right. Can't keep wandering aimlessly.
And he knew that, he needed to have some sort of education in order to do more than what he was doing. Mm-hmm. And that, he could tell that it wasn't going to be a good idea to be out here and be a trapper forever because the white man was taking away land left and right. So, he had heard about, kind of the sport football. Mm-hmm. And this I'm saying based off of several internet articles that I read, not necessarily from this very, very well-researched book, because I haven't even gotten to this part of the well-researched book. But he, had heard about football. He had heard about track and athletics being offered at the Carlisle Indian School. So the Carlisle Indian Industrial School was a school, another Indian boarding school, and they had kids from the age of 6 to 22.
22?
So that's why they could play college sports.
You know what? As I was reading, I couldn't figure out where the differentiation was. But dang.
So it was not just a boarding school for kids as we know it.
Right.
But it was a boarding school that went all the way up through college for Native Americans.
That's crazy because I guess, like you said, in my mind, I'm thinking by the time you're 18, you're done. Like, figure it out. Wow. 22.
I mean, you know, it because most colleges would not accept a Native.
They had to give them, if they wanted them to have that education, they had to provide it themselves to them. That makes sense.
The thing is about the school is that, and this is another point where you're going to be like, damn, that's just like, you know, this place and that place and this other place, right?
Right.
The kids did everything on the school grounds. They farmed the land. They cooked the food. Okay, so the boys were expected to build the buildings, maintain the buildings. They took care of the livestock. They farmed the land. They, you know, all the traditional male roles they had to do.
Wow.
Part of their school day was work. That's why it's an industrial school. The women, the female students, had to clean, cook, prepare, you know, the boys took care of baking bread for some reason. Apparently bread baking was a male occupation.
Okay.
I mean, I guess
back then
you didn't have very many female bakers professionally, so okay. But they had to cook, they had to clean, they learned how to, you know, iron and press clothes. All of that.
Wow.
So
it's like really extreme home ec.
It was, and honestly, like that's how the prison system in England worked. If you were in the poorhouse, prison system, and the orphanages, they were teaching you to do these things so that you could be an industrious young person when you graduated. When, you know, they kicked you out, basically.
Exactly, on the streets and said, figure it out.
Mm-hmm. So all of these things were redone by these students.
That's nuts.
Everything that made the whole place run was done by the students.
So what were the teachers there for?
Just to teach the actual subjects. And then they had watchers who took care of making sure that the stuff got done. And
okay.
Also made sure that the kids weren't talking to each other in their native languages. And they were so indoctrinated that a young lady once said one word to her friend at dinner in her native language, felt so guilty about it that she wrote a letter of confession to the superintendent of the school.
What?
And then it was published in the school's newspaper. Yeah.
That's like telling somebody who comes to America now, don't speak French. Don't speak Spanish.
But you know what? Back then, that's exactly what they said.
What?
Because they said, this is how he got the idea. So when people immigrated into the U.S., as they would get separated from their culture, and they would become American, and we should give the Native Americans the same opportunity.
Wow.
That's why he separated out the natives.
So is that why, and in their head, they're like, we are only helping you.
Yes.
This can only help you.
Yes.
There's no way totally destroying who you are fundamentally as a person. It's going to hurt you.
Well, in their head, there was no place for native thinking. They were
savages.
Well, they had been described as such for so many years, though historically there were more natives scalped and hurt by white men than there ever were the other way around. But the truth is that because the native world was shrinking, they could only see every white man who went and worked for these schools and everything could only think that they were helping because eventually the native way of life would disappear. The thing is, when you are making it a self-fulfilling prophecy, when you are taking native children away.
Exactly. And causing it to happen.
Yes. So that's kind of, you know, the nutshell on the school. And Thorpe just kind of was like, well, I gotta do something with my life.
Might as well go try this out.
Yeah.
Again, what? Like, just happenstance. Like, well, I've heard they got some decent stuff here. Let's see what happens. Like, it could have went either way. And he just happened to find out about this particular school where he was just going to blow up.
Well, and he got there when he was like 16.
Yeah.
Now, the story of him beating his father home and his runaway attempt should tell you something about not only his smarts, but how fast he was.
Yeah.
36 miles. Jim knew a shortcut that was 18, but his dad was in a cart with a horse.
What the hell? Alien. Stick to that statement. Alien.
So that should tell you something about his speed.
When we get to the stats, though, you'll be like, okay, now I get why he could do that.
That should tell you something about his speed. So when he got to Carlisle, he actually joined the track team. Mm-hmm. And Pop Warner was the track coach.
Which, again, he's not... Pop Warner, football. What... The where's the correlation?
Well,
you know what I mean?
It's kind of like any school where, like, most of the time your coaches coach a couple of different...
That's true.
I mean, I don't know if you're at a bigger school or a school that fully concentrates on one sport, maybe they don't. But at the school I went to, it was a very small school, and most of our coaches coached more than one
See, I went to a little bit bigger of a school, so, like, we had a football coaches. We had basketball coach. We had... swim coach, because we actually had a swim team.
Our football coach was also our wrestling coach.
See, no, we even had a separate wrestling coach. That's not a ding-worthy offense. Put that mallet down. You want to do it so bad. Don't do it.
No, this is where he should jump in with, are we going wabbit hunting? I did it.
Hey, it only took most of the episode, but that's not the point.
I made him
squishy face.
Squishy face. How many more minutes do we have, Eli? Too many, he says.
Right, two. They're going to keep going. Okay.
How close are we to our hour?
Yeah, really. Like, how much time do we have for real?
You can keep on going.
That's not specific enough.
Yeah.
We're not 47 minutes.
Okay. That's what we need to know.
We've got just over 10 minutes because we are going to break this into a second episode.
Because there's so much to cover. Right.
Because we're still in he just got to school.
Like you are in the book. We're where you are in the book, literally.
Yeah, like I haven't even gotten to the point where he's gotten to the school.
Okay, so we're a couple steps ahead than you in the book.
I mean, like I said, the book covers 4 different histories at once.
Yeah, football, him,
Thorpe, and the Carlisle School.
Yeah.
So Pop Warner, Jim Thorpe, the Carlisle School, and football covered all in one book.
It's a pretty comprehensive book.
So, yeah, he gets to the school, and he is on the track team.
Yeah.
Pop Warner's his coach. He wins a lot of track meets with them, and one day in the fall, he sees the football team practicing. Possibly early summer, or late summer, early fall, before the season started. And he goes up to Pop Warner, and he goes, I want to play. And Pop's like, No, you're my star track runner.
And when we say star, like, he was like the one-man track team for Carlisle. Like, he did everything.
He was in every event.
So he was like, yeah, you can't get hurt because you're my team.
He's like, no. You're my track star. You're not football.
Go sit down over there.
And he's like, and this is in time, and maybe... I'm not going to get too much into it. We'll start off the next show with this part of the history of football. But this is at a time when football was not wearing padding, no helmets.
Yep.
If you wore the leather helmet, you were a sissy.
This cracks me up.
It was glorified rugby. I mean, it really was.
Yeah.
And honestly, it was rougher than rugby.
Because at least rugby had rules.
Did you know that in the early days of football... This is for you too, Dr. Robinson. In the early days of football, teammates would sew luggage handles onto the side of their teammates' uniforms because part of playing football was that you ran the ball into the scrum and your team could pull you forward through. And if they couldn't get a good enough grip on your uniform, they would sometimes sew handles in so they could.
What?
Yep.
What?
Yep.
So you would just break a handle off of a suitcase and sew it onto the uniform, and you would literally just drag another human being downfield. Football, is a savage sport.
Like, so football and rugby are cousins, right?
Didn't football originate from? You told me that they originated from rugby. Okay,
So
off topic, but
rugby and football originated from the same similar basic sport.
right.
I don't know what the name of it was, but if you think of early football, if you want to think about how early football may have looked,
Yeah.
look at traditional rugby, not the rugby that's played in the Olympics, because that's like rugby 7. Like traditional 20-man on 20-man rugby. Oh, yeah, by the way, very, very early football, your entire 50-man roster was on the team all at once.
What? Okay. It's like watching, like those motorized football games. That would go. It's like watching that and just being so confused because all the little players are moving at once. I have a hard enough time following.
The whole point was to create a mound of people that somebody couldn't get through.
That is literally rugby. Well, the first time I went to a rugby game and I saw them do that whole pound thing, I was like,
yeah, that's called the scrum.
Anyway, back on topic.
So, once you know that that's how it was played,
no wonder he was like, hell no.
Pop Warner was like, no.
Because you are going to get hurt. There's no if, ands, or buts. Something's going to happen to you.
And when we come back, the next show,
yes,
I will tell you what actually happened when Jim forced Pop's hand and went on the field.
It's about to get real exciting.
It is an incredible story. It's hilarious.
This, again, I'm going to repeat, alien.
I feel bad for the linemen. That's all I've got to say.
Oh, Eagles in the trash.
I mean, Eli, what position did you play when you played?
Defensive end.
Okay, yeah. So I will involve you when we actually go into the story of the next one because I want to know how bad your ego
how you would
hurt.
Would you have quit playing football?
After this story? And remember that you're talking about, 50 dudes with you on defense.
Right.
Right?
And mind you, there's still just some dude that walked on the field.
And by the time the gym started playing football, I think they had pared it down to 12 men on a field at the time.
But still. Especially if you're the star. And then here comes I'm not going to get
Here comes a walk-on player.
I'm not going to get into it.
But yeah. So,
on that note,
being said,
more to come on Jim Thorpe and this crazy athlete.
I mean, I am honestly hoping that we can get to a lot of Jim, because we had to set the base up for Jim.
Yeah.
We had to, cover the background of all of that in order for us to get into the real meat of things.
And understand why he was so incredible.
But I'm hoping that we can finish the rest of it in just one episode.
I think we can. We're past the hard part was setting the background.
Setting everything up, the background.
Yeah.
It's always the slowest part of the book when you're reading is the background. And,
you're where's the action? I need meat potatoes.
Right. Some people are better than others at setting up, the scenery. And telling you, some people have much longer descriptions of the mountainside than others. So.
It's like reading Lord of the Rings. It took us 2 chapters just to figure out what Middle Earth kind of looked like and still don't really know. But anyway.
So anyways, we want to thank you guys for listening today.
Yes.
And we hope that you will continue to listen to us and tune in next week for the
Part 2
of Jim Thorpe.
Which we will call the original GOAT. Because honestly, he really was. Thank you guys. Let us know if you knew who Jim Thorpe was. Where was your introduction to Jim Thorpe? What sport did you get introduced to him in? Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, our Gmail. So many ways to reach out to us. We can't wait to hear from you soon. We'll see you in the next one. Bye, humans.
Bye.